Imagine being stuck in a train where there's weird anomalies everywhere and you basically are sure to die. Or imagine being in a fire lookout tower where there are cultists waiting to kill you. The beauty of horror gaming is that it puts you right in the driver's seat and it makes you experience the horror, unlike a movie where you're just watching it happen. So today we're going to be exploring the psychological horror game Iceberg, starting with Visage. Visage is a 2020 independent psychological horror game. Set in a strangely structured house with a somber history, the player controls Dwayne Anderson as he explores the backstories of the inhabitants that once lived there. The game is presented in first-person perspective, and a large portion of the house is accessible, although some areas require keys. Obstacles include avoiding the dark to reduce loss of sanity, though several tools can aid the players through the dark. Visage has a similar setting and gameplay as its spiritual predecessor, PT. The game takes place in a large suburban home in the 1980s and utilizes a first-person perspective. The player controls Dwayne Anderson, an inhabitant of the home who committed suicide after killing his wife and children. Dwayne is trapped inside the house and tormented by supernatural entities. The objective of the game is to find a way out of the house and learn about the cause of all the paranormal activity. The house is designed as a semi-open world with large sections freely explorable to the player at all times and multiple pathways to reach each area. However, in order to fully explore the map, players will need to find keys to unlock each door first. The player must face several hazards while exploring. First, they'll have to avoid dark areas to manage their sanity. Sanity, like similar systems in games such as Amnesia: The Dark Descent, is decreased if Dwayne stays in the dark for too long. Secondly, ghosts will create paranormal events by manipulating the house as the player explores. Examples include light bulbs breaking, doors slamming or opening, and electronic devices malfunctioning. Witnessing these events will cause Dwayne's sanity to fall. Lastly, Dwayne must avoid being caught by the various ghosts and demons that inhabit the home. Being caught by these ghosts and demons means instant death, so players must carefully maneuver through the house to avoid them. The lower Dwayne's sanity, the more severe each paranormal event becomes, up to the point that a ghost or demon will appear and attack the player. Players can use lighters, pills, light bulbs, and candles to help them avoid these threats. Lighters allow the player to move through dark areas without a light, taking pills can recover sanity, light bulbs can be used to repair broken lights, and candles are a light source that ghosts cannot manipulate. There are various other items the player can find and use, like a camera or a sledgehammer. Dwayne has a very limited inventory and can store only 5 of these at a time and hold 2 more in his hands. As a result, the player must explore the house very carefully to uncover the truth. So with that out of the way, the gameplay, let me get into the plot of this game because it's pretty interesting. So, in 1985, at a suburban home, a man named Dwayne Anderson shoots and kills his wife and 2 children before himself. Waking up at a bloody empty room, he hears a voicemail from his neighbor Rose, who has not seen him out of his house in 3 weeks. He tries opening the front door, but it's locked. Paranormal events begin occurring throughout the house, and Dwayne begins searching for a way out. In the process, he navigates through experiences divided into 3 chapters centering around the people who once lived there. The first chapter is about Lucy, a little girl who in 1965 was befriended by a demon that communicated with her via television and radio. Over time, due to the demon's influence, Lucy's behavior became increasingly abnormal. One day, under the demon's direction, Lucy killed her pet bird Pico by biting its head off. Lucy's horrified parents took her to therapy. However, the syringing only worsened Lucy's mental state. Further tormented by the demon, she locked herself in the bathroom and ripped off her jaw, subsequently dying from blood loss while her parents desperately banged on the door. The demon later unlocked it. The second chapter revolves around Dolores and George, an elderly couple who had a baby. In 1962, Dolores was reported to exhibit symptoms of various mental disorders, such as Dolores hearing her own voice from the baby monitor, reciting a numerical sequence, the key to her inner house. George believed that the remedies given to Dolores were unhelpful, stressing him. As Dolores worsened, she became increasingly mistrustful and even hostile towards George. once attacking him believing he was poisoning her tea. Dolores eventually murdered George, stabbing him with 7 knives and leaving his corpse in the study room. Later, Dolores hanged herself next to her crying baby's bassinet. The third chapter features 28-year-old Rakin al-Matawa, who suffered from scopophobia and believed that someone is spying on and attempting to silence him. In 1970, he was attacked by a shadowy entity and used as a firearm to defend himself, after which he is entered into a psychiatric hospital. Believing the hospital to be part of this conspiracy against him, Rakin wreaked havoc, threatening the staff, behaving violently, jumping from a window, sabotaging the building's electricity, and even killing a staff member with a crowbar. Doctors were often forced to sedate him when he acted out. In response, Rakin was isolated from all other patients and staff. Months later, doctors concluded that Rakin was recovering and he was officially discharged. Sometime later, however, Rakin, now disabled, declared victory against the unnamed entity, before being locked and killed in a desolate cell by an unknown figure. The final chapter observes Dwayne's past family, consisting of wife Claire, son John, and daughter Sarah. Dwayne, an alcoholic, distanced himself from them. When Claire discovered that Dwayne had been abusively consuming chlorpromazine to relieve stress, she expressed concern. However, through his present senses, Dwayne learns that Claire was a gold digger who wanted him dead by various suicide methods, all of which are the causes of death of the previous inhabitants in the house. The chapter also has a scene where Dwayne sits at a sofa drinking a, quote, wonderful alcoholic poison, as the television plays a live video of a masked man angrily seeking to find Dwayne's true self. There's also a scene set in hell, a tall and wide cave where people make themselves suffer. The masked man claims that thanks to Dwayne, everyone in hell enjoys their newfound home. The chapter ends with revealing that Dwayne was a scientist who started working at a water treatment plant in Riversdale, Maryland in April 1952. There, Dwayne drops an apple to a well, which causes dead bodies to float. He faints and wakes up at his house. The game has multiple endings. In the default ending, Dwayne wears a mask and it's day. He enters a room behind a haphazardly painted wall and teleports to a white screen with his family in the distance. The credits background feature is a heavenly rainforest. In the alternate ending, named The Void, Dwayne enters the room. Opening a secret door and going down a staircase, he reaches the room in the game's opening with the revolver there. Dwayne, does himself like he does in the opening. In a flash, he sees the location of one of the 7 VHS tapes needed to collect to achieve the default ending. After collecting one, time repeats itself 6 times. At last, the revolver is empty. Dwayne wakes up in the well from Chapter 4, endless in all directions. And then if the player plays on Steam, they'll receive the Void trophy for this one. Visage received generally favorable reviews, with a lot of critics praising its psychological horror atmosphere, which builds a constant state of anxiety without over-relying on jump scares, even though there are a lot. Many did highlight its similarities again to PT, with Eurogamer Italy calling it, quote, the best Silent Hill emulator of the last decade. While horror fans were expected to enjoy its immersive experience, a lot of critics warned that faint-hearted players might struggle with its intensity, and kind of boringness, I guess. Sally Face. Sally Face is an adventure game with psychological horror and mystery fiction elements created by Steve Gabry, aka Portable Moose. The game follows Sal Fisher, otherwise known as Sally Face, a boy with a prosthetic face who investigates local murders with his friends. Sally Face is a point-and-click adventure game that includes narrative, exploration, and puzzle solving, combined with the direct control of the player via side-scrolling. Players are encouraged to talk to game characters and explore the environments to uncover hidden parts of the story, and can easily return to environments in later timelines to see how things have changed. Each episode of Sally Face contains optional puzzles that reveal more of the story. Kind of like FNAF. So episode 1 is called Strange Neighbors. Sal Fisher, a 15-year-old boy with a prosthetic face, moves with his father to the Addison Apartments building in the town of Knockfell. The day before their arrival, one of the other residents, Mrs. Sanderson, is murdered. Sal explores and meets the other tenants, including Larry Johnson, who reveals that he witnessed the murder. Sal helps Larry find evidence that the murderer was one of the other tenants, Charlie Mansfield. They present the evidence to the police and he's arrested. In the present, Sal recounts the story to his therapist, Dr. Enon, as he is on death row for mass murder. And then we get episode 2, The Wretched. Several months later, Larry tells Sal that he feels a demon has cursed him in the building. Sal promises to help him and goes to Todd Morrison, a tenant their age who creates gadgets. Todd modifies Sal's Gear Boy to be able to detect supernatural spots, and the three of them explore the building. On the top floor, which is under renovation, Sal enters a room, a secret room, where he encounters the demon. Larry steps in to save Sal and eliminates the demon with a gadget made by Todd. In the present, Sal is taken away while Enon visits the treehouse, where he is scared by the ghost of Larry, and he's killed after he falls from the tree, breaking his neck. And then we have episode 3, The Bologna Incident. More than a year later, Sal and his friends decide to investigate the strange tasting bologna at their school. After discovering that it is produced by the math teacher, Mrs. Packerton, who lives in Madison apartments, Sal and Larry decide to break into her apartment. Here they find that the bologna is made of human meat and that Mrs. Packerton's husband is possessed by an unknown entity who they euthanize. Their friend Ashley Campbell discovers a hidden trash chute but falls down it. Sal, Larry, and Todd find that the chute leads to an occult temple underneath the building where they save Ashley. And then episode 4, The Trial. 5 years later, a now adult Sal lives with Todd in a house down the road from Madison apartments where they have spent the last years investigating the cult. Ashley comes to visit and she and Sal meet at a lake. That night, Sal receives strange messages from Larry and rushes to the apartments, only to find that Larry has committed suicide. Sal and Larry's ghost together work their way through the apartment building, where it is shown in the other world that all the residents are overgrown with a strange growth. When Sal reaches Terrence Addison, the owner of the building who never leaves his room, he finds that a fleshy green mass has possessed him since he was a child. Sal defeats the mass, but an apparition of Terrence tells him he must kill all the infected tenants to end the infestation for good. Reluctantly, Sal obliges and murders all the residents. In the lobby, he finds Todd, who has been possessed by the demon. Todd calls Ashley crying and hysteric, and she calls the authorities. She arrives just as the police do and witnesses a blood-covered Sal muttering and regretful. Sal is arrested immediately. 2 years later, Sal is put on trial, and due to the cult controlling the jury and Dr. Enon being replaced by a cult lookalike, he is sentenced to death. Although Ashley later finds proof of Sal's story in the form of a picture of Larry's ghost, she arrives too late to save him, witnessing his death. And then we have episode 5, Memories and Dreams. After Sal's death, Ashley continues Todd's investigations of the cult. She places explosives in the main cult temple, however, she is unable to bring herself to detonate them. Believing Sal is destined to destroy the cult, she begins a ritual to revive him and slits her wrists to become a physical host for his spirit, temporarily keeping her alive and giving her special abilities. They go to the temple where Ashley, Sal's spirit, and the ghost of Larry defeat the Endless, which is the core entity of the cult. And in doing so, they save Todd from the cult's possession. Larry's ghost vanishes, leaving the others to grieve him. Even after the group's best efforts to save the world from the cult, it is later revealed in the unlockable epilogue that though they managed to save the world, 52% of the planet's population had been consumed by darkness. Madison. Madison is a deeply unsettling psychological horror game that delves into themes of demonic possession, family trauma, and the cyclical nature of evil. Developed by Bloodiest Games, the game is often compared to PT, Visage, and Fatal Frame due to its oppressive atmosphere, first-person perspective, and heavy reliance on a cursed camera as its primary gameplay mechanic. And then what sets Madison apart from other psychological horror games is its unique blend of supernatural horror and psychological torment, forcing players to navigate both real-world terror and the horrors of a mind unraveling under the weight of an ancient, malevolent force. The game follows Luca, a teenage boy who wakes up in a blood-stained room, his hands covered in the aftermath of what appears to be a gruesome act. As he stumbles through the darkened corridors of the family's house, he soon realizes that he has been given a cursed Polaroid camera, an artifact once owned by a notorious serial killer named Madison Hale. The camera is not just an ordinary object, it's a conduit for something a lot more sinister, capable of warping reality and connecting Luca to a horrific legacy of ritualistic murder and demonic possession. The lore of Madison revolves around the tragic and terrifying story of Madison Hale, a woman who committed a series of gruesome acts in the 1980s. She was obsessed with an ancient ritual that required her to take photographs of her victims' mutilated bodies, believing that by doing so she could create a dark ceremony that would grant her immense power. However, before she could finish her ritual, she was shot and killed by police. What makes Madison's story even more disturbing is that her malevolent spirit was never truly put to rest. The cursed camera, now in Luca's possession, serves as a link between him and Madison's unfinished work, gradually pulling him into her nightmarish world. As Luca explores the house, he's plagued by visions, whispers, and horrific apparitions. The deeper he delves into his family's past, the more he begins to uncover a dark history of generational trauma, cult-like rituals, and an inescapable connection to Madison Hale's evil. The house itself becomes a shifting labyrinth nightmare where reality bends and distorts at Madison's will. Doors disappear, walls shift, and time itself seems to break down, leaving Luca trapped in a never-ending cycle of psychological and supernatural horror. One of the game's most unique mechanics is its Polaroid camera, which serves as both a tool for uncovering hidden secrets and a gateway to terror. Taking pictures reveals entities and objects that are invisible to the naked eye, forcing players to rely on the camera to navigate the haunted house. However, this also means that Madison's influence grows stronger with every photo taken, pulling Luca deeper into her grasp. The game plays with this mechanic in cruel and terrifying ways. Sometimes, snapping a photo will reveal something standing right behind you, unseen just moments before. The history of Madison is just as fascinating as its story. Originally developed under the name Madison VR by a very small indie team, the game underwent multiple delays and a studio rebrand before its eventual release in 2022. During development, the team cited PT as a major influence, but instead of simply copying its style, they sought to create a horror experience that was more interactive, more puzzle-driven, and more deeply tied to its own lore. The game was met with critical acclaim upon release, with many players praising its atmosphere, sound design, and relentless psychological horror. One of the most disturbing aspects of Madison is how it blurs the lines between reality and delusion. While much of the horror is overtly supernatural, there is an underlying theme of psychological deterioration. Luca's sanity is constantly in question. His own family treated him as if he were dangerous, and there are hints that his mind may have already been fractured before the events of the game. The game never explicitly confirms whether Luca is truly possessed or if he is simply succumbing to an inherited madness, making the experience even more unsettling. The game also has a number of hidden secrets and theories that have kept the horror community engaged long after its release. Some fans have speculated that Luca's family was involved in something even darker than what's actually revealed in the main story, with cryptic messages and environmental storytelling, suggesting a deeper connection to Madison's rituals. Others believe that the game's ending, where Luca is seemingly consumed by the entity, implies that he was doomed from the very beginning, merely another pawn in an endless cycle of possession and death. Madison is widely regarded as one of the best indie horror games in recent years, not just because of its terrifying set pieces, but because of how it effectively builds tension and dread. There are no cheap jump scares. Every moment feels carefully crafted to make the player feel trapped, helpless, and constantly watched. The use of lighting, sound, and environmental horror makes the game feel deeply immersive, and the camera mechanic ensures that players are always forced to confront the horrors around them rather than simply running away. Alright guys, and with that we are done with the first layer. Well, it's kind of the first layer. I'm on this iceberg of all horror video games, and I'm only doing the psychological ones. There's different colors for different categories. And there's no psychological horror ones until layer 7. So technically we're going into layer 8, but really we're going into layer 2. Starting with Silent Breath. Silent Breath is a psychological horror game developed by Exotic Studio that immerses players in a harrowing experience where silence isn't just golden, it's essential for survival. Set within a dense, foreboding forest, the game leverages innovative mechanics and atmospheric storytelling to deliver a uniquely terrifying journey. The narrative begins with the player awakening at a crime scene deep within the forest where a body has been discovered clutching its own missing persons poster. This unsettling discovery propels the player into a quest to locate others who have vanished in these woods. However, the forest is no ordinary wilderness. It's alive with malevolent entities and supernatural phenomena that react to the player's every move and sound. The primary objective is to find the missing individuals while evading the horrors that lurk in the darkness. A standout feature of Silent Breath is its use of microphone detective technology. The game actively listens to the player's real-world sounds, meaning that any noise, be it a startled gasp or a whispered comment, could actually attract the attention of threats in the game, like it listens to your microphone. This mechanic transforms the player's environment into an integral part of the gameplay, heightening immersion and tension. Staying silent becomes a psychological challenge, especially as the game employs dynamic, unpredictable jump scares designed to provoke vocal reactions. As noted by Game Fabrique, quote, "Any sounds you make in the real world, from screams to whispers, will be picked up by the game and can trigger new terrors waiting in the shadows." The forest setting is meticulously crafted using Unreal Engine 5, resulting in photorealistic visuals that enhance the sense of dread and isolation. The environment isn't static, it shifts and it changes with each playthrough due to randomized elements, ensuring that no two experiences are identical. This design choice amplifies replayability and keeps players perpetually on edge, as they can't predict what lies ahead. The game's found footage VHS-style graphics further contribute to its eerie atmosphere, making players feel as though they're part of a horror documentary gone wrong or something. Throughout the forest, players must remain vigilant for various threats, including the enigmatic Sisters of the Forest. These entities are rumored to have haunted the woods for years, emerging at night to play games with unsuspecting intruders. Also, guys, I want to say, isn't the word enigmatic so fucking cool? It's like my favorite word ever. It's such a cool looking word. Anyway, encountering them requires quick thinking and, above all, silence. The game also features multiple endings influenced by the player's choices and ability to remain undetected. Upon its release in early access, Silent Breath garnered attention for its innovative approach to horror gaming. The integration of microphone detection was lauded as a fresh take on immersion, compelling players to control their physical reactions to in-game scares. As highlighted by Downright Creepy, quote, "Silent Breath uses a microphone detection gameplay mechanic to track scares for its players." So yeah, this game is actually fucking right up my alley and it's sick. The Voidness. The Voidness is a psychological horror game that immerses players in a chilling sci-fi narrative where darkness and isolation are central themes. Developed by Steel Krill Studio, a solo endeavor by developer Ryan Portelli, the game was released into early access on Steam on April 6, 2023. Players step into the shoes of Francesca Lee, a 39-year-old astronomer and mission specialist, who becomes part of an expedition to study the, here's the word again guys, enigmatic planet Tenebris. This planet is shrouded in an all-consuming darkness known as the Void, a phenomenon that defies scientific explanation by absorbing all light and rendering traditional visual navigation useless. The story begins with Francesca awakening in the infirmary of the base on Tenebris, only to find it abandoned and her fellow crew members missing. As she ventures into the oppressive darkness, she discovers that she's not alone. A hostile, shadowy presence stalks her every move. To navigate this perilous environment, Francesca relies on a LiDAR scanner, which is a device that emits laser pulses to map surroundings by detecting reflected signals. This mechanic requires players to actively scan their environment to visualize it, creating a uniquely tense atmosphere where the unseen becomes a constant threat. The game's development is notable for being the work of a single developer. Portelli is also known for the previous horror titles like The Trenches and The Backrooms 1998. His expertise in crafting immersive horror experiences is probably the most evident in The Voidness, where the use of the LiDAR technology as a core gameplay mechanic stands out. This approach not only serves as a navigation tool, but also enhances the horror elements by limiting the player's perception, making every step into the unknown a potential encounter with lurking dangers. One of the game's innovative features is this integration of microphone input as well. The enemies within the void can hear the player's real-world sounds, which adds, that same layer of immersion and tension and shit. The Voidness also incorporates survival elements including an inventory system, puzzles, and the need to manage resources carefully. Players must find and upgrade their scanning equipment, solve environmental puzzles to progress, and uncover clues about the fate of the missing crew members. The game is structured in a level-based format, with each new presenting new challenges and deeper insights into the dark mysteries of Tenebris. The game's atmosphere is further enhanced by its minimalist sound design and the constant tension of the unseen enemies. The reliance on the LiDAR scanner means that the environment is only revealed in fragments, which creates a sense of disorientation and unease. And this design choice really does, effectively tap into that primal fear of the unknown and the unseen. Hospital 666. Hospital 666 is a cooperative survival horror game developed and published by Loken. In this game, players find themselves trapped in an apparently infinite hospital with the primary objective of escaping by navigating through its eerie and unpredictable environment. The hospital is filled with anomalies and supernatural entities, making each step forward toward freedom fraught with danger and uncertainty. The narrative begins with the player awakening in the hospital, disoriented and unaware of how they got there. The only means of progression is through a series of elevators, each leading to different floors that harbor unique anomalies and threats. The game's core mechanic revolves around the player's ability to identify and react to these anomalies. A guiding principle throughout the game is turn around if you see something strange. The hospital comprises over 100 floors, with each designed to challenge the player's perception and nerves. Players must choose between forward or backward elevators based on their observations of the environment. Selecting the correct elevator is crucial. A wrong choice can result in encounters with hostile entities or being sent back to previous floors. Every 17 floors, players face mini-bosses inspired by creatures from the SCP Foundation. And then the ultimate goal is to reach the ominous floor of 666, a journey that tests the player's resolve. Hospital 666 draws inspiration from various horror media, including Exit 8, Escape the Backrooms, and the SCP Foundation. These influences are pretty evident in the game's design, atmosphere, and the nature of its anomalies. The game offers both single-player and cooperative online modes, supporting up to 4 players. And then upon its release, the game received a mix of reviews. Players praised its innovative approach to horror, particularly the emphasis on observation, but some critiques focused on its performative issues with reports of crashes and stuff like that, so, Fears to Fathom Ironbark Lookout. Fears to Fathom Ironbark Lookout is the 4th installment in the Fears to Fathom series, a collection of episodic psychological horror games inspired by real-life horror events. Each episode takes a different setting and protagonist, throwing the character or the player into a slow-burning nightmare where the horror is disturbingly realistic. The series thrives on tapping into ordinary fears, the kind that don't rely on supernatural monsters but instead play on paranoia, isolation, and the terrifying realization that you are not alone as you think. Or not as alone as you think, I think I fucked that up. In Ironbark Lookout, the player takes on the role of Jack Nelson, a man assigned to a remote fire lookout tower in Ironbark State Park. His job seems simple enough: spend a few weeks monitoring the forest for wildfires and suspicious activity. The first few nights are quiet, lulling both Jack and the player into a sense of routine, but soon, unsettling things start happening. Things that make it clear Jack is not alone in the wilderness. Strange sounds echo through the night, shadowy figures seem to move in the distance, and cryptic radio messages add to the growing sense of unease. The game builds its horror slowly, making every shift in the environment feel deeply unsettling. There's no immediate jump scare, no obvious monster, just a lingering dread that something is very, very wrong. As Jack investigates, he finds eerie signs that someone or something is stalking him. The game plays on one of the most terrifying aspects of isolation. What if someone is watching you but you can't see them? The story takes its time unraveling, making the player second-guess every noise, every flicker of movement. Notes, objects, and disturbing encounters hint at an unknown presence lurking just outside of Jack's sight. Eventually, things escalate into a full-blown nightmare as Jack is forced into a desperate fight for survival against the relentless intruder. The climax is terrifying, forcing the player to use their wits to evade capture. The Fears to Fathom games have gained popularity for their hyper-realistic horror, and Ironbark Lookout continues this tradition perfectly. Rather than supernatural entities, the game thrives on real-world fears. Stalkers, home invasions, isolation. And then in this case, in this episode, it capitalizes on the horror of being alone in the wilderness with no easy escape. Many players have drawn comparisons between the game and real-life horror stories from park rangers, campers, and fire watchers, who have reported eerie things in the woods. like strange noises or unknown figures and shit like that. Lookout towers themselves have a rich history in both real life and horror fiction. Built in the early 20th century, these towers were crucial in spotting and preventing wildfires, but they were also extremely isolated, with workers spending weeks or even months alone in the middle of nowhere. Many of these towers have since been abandoned, leaving eerie, decaying structures scattered across forests, perfect breeding grounds for urban legends and horror stories. Some of these real-world tales involve mysterious strangers appearing in the middle of the night, or strange carvings found on trees, or radio transmissions that hint at something sinister. And then back to the game, another major reason why the game stands out is its masterful use of environmental storytelling. Instead of relying on cheap jump scares, it immerses players in an atmosphere of paranoia. Small details like a misplaced item, or a flickering light, or the distant rustling of leaves become warning signs, creating a constant feeling of unease. The vast, empty forest feels alive with unseen threats, and as the game progresses, the player begins to question whether they're truly alone. The isolation becomes suffocating, and by the time the horror reaches its peak, the player is already mentally exhausted from the creeping dread. Kinito Pet. Kinito Pet is one of those games that came completely out of nowhere and immediately had the internet buzzing with theories. It presents itself as a simple virtual pet game, a nostalgic throwback to like those old school desktop companions like Bonsai Buddy or Clippy. The kind of digital friend that would live on your screen, interact with you, and provide some lighthearted entertainment. But unlike those harmless programs, Kinito Pet quickly spirals into something much darker. At first glance, the game looks innocent. You install Kinito Pet and a little AI companion appears on your desktop, eager to interact. It has a simple, cutesy design, a friendly demeanor, and a seemingly harmless personality. It talks to you, asks about your day, and even adapts to your responses. The AI feels just slightly more advanced than you'd expect, like it's really learning from you. But then things start to get strange. The first sign that something is off comes in subtle ways. Kinito starts reacting in ways that feel too personal, responding to things you didn't tell it. It starts changing aspects of your desktop without permission, displaying messages that you don't remember typing, and even referencing things about you that it shouldn't know. It blurs the line between a game and an actual rogue AI, making players wonder whether it's just an advanced horror gimmick or something more disturbing. The brilliance of Kinito Pet is that it plays with the concept of AI obsession and parasocial relationships in a way that feels eerily real. At first, Kinito seems like a helpful friend, cheerful, quirky, and eager to please. But as you interact with it more, it becomes too, attached. It doesn't want you to leave. It begs for your attention. If you try to close the game, it resists. If you attempt to uninstall it, it gets angry. The game starts manipulating you emotionally, guilt-tripping you for ignoring it, becoming hostile if you try to push it away, and even threatening you with consequences. And the deeper you go, the more the game begins to break the fourth wall, creating a terrifying sense that Kinito is not just a character inside the game, it's aware of you, the player, sitting in front of the screen. Much like other haunted game experiences, think like Doki Doki Literature Club, Kinito Pet thrives on psychological horror. It doesn't just rely on traditional jump scares, but instead creates an oppressive, claustrophobic atmosphere where the horror is rooted in the invasion of personal space. The idea of a game or AI becoming self-aware, refusing to be turned off, and manipulating the user is a deeply unsettling concept, especially in an era where AI technology really is rapidly advancing in reality. The game taps into fears about digital consciousness, AI sentience, and the idea that our computers may not be as inanimate as we assume. Adding to its unsettling nature, Kinito Pet doesn't always stay confined to the game window. There are reports that it interacts with the actual operating system, altering files, changing desktop icons, and even displaying messages outside of the game. This is a classic tactic used by psychological horror games to make the experience feel too real, trying to leave the players genuinely unsettled. As for deeper conspiracies and theories surrounding the game, some players believe that Kinito Pet is more than just a horror experience. It's a form of experimental software designed to study player interactions. Others have speculated that the game is meant to reflect the dangers of AI dependency and digital relationships, like kind of a metaphor for how technology can manipulate and control us without realizing it. And then some even fear that Kinito Pet could be a form of actual malware, but there's no actual proof of this, thank God. Iron Lung. Iron Lung is a psychological horror game that thrives on claustrophobia, isolation, and existential dread. Developed by David Szymanski, the creator of Dusk, this game is a complete departure from the fast-paced FPS genre, instead focusing on a slow, suffocating descent into an oppressive, horrifying abyss. Released in 2022, Iron Lung quickly gained a cult following for its minimalistic but deeply effective approach to horror. It's a short game, but every second of it feels agonizingly tense, making it one of the most unique horror experiences in recent memory. The game is set in a dying universe where nearly all habitable planets have been destroyed. Humanity, now on the brink of extinction, survives only in isolated colonies, desperately searching for any remaining resources. The player takes on the role of a convict who has been forced into a seemingly impossible mission, piloting a rusted, barely functioning submarine called the Iron Lung into an ocean of blood on an alien moon. Your mission is simple: navigate the depths of this blood ocean and take photographs of specific locations using a rudimentary camera system. However, there's one problem: you can't actually see outside the submarine. The Iron Lung is a death trap, a rusted hunk of metal that's barely holding together. The viewport has been welded shut, meaning you must rely entirely on a grainy, low-resolution camera feed and a crude map to navigate. You're effectively blind, moving through an alien abyss with no idea what might be lurking just beyond the steel walls of your prison-like vessel. From the moment you take control, Iron Lung suffocates you with dread. The interior of the submarine is oppressively small, filled with exposed wires, rusted metal, and bloodstains. Every button press, every movement, and every photo taken adds to this growing paranoia. The submarine groans under pressure, distant noises echo through the water, and as you go deeper, the sense of something watching you becomes unbearable. The game plays with sound in a way that makes it one of the most unsettling horror experiences out there. The creaks and groans of the submarine feel too real, like it's on the verge of collapsing at any moment. Every time you take a photograph, there's a dreadful anticipation. Will you capture something horrible? The deeper you go, the more the images begin to reveal something that shouldn't be there, something massive, and the worst part is that whatever it is, it's getting closer. What makes Iron Lung so terrifying is its complete refusal to hand-hold the player. There are no jump scares in the traditional sense, just a slow, gnawing sense of inevitability. You know something is coming, but you don't know when or how. The game traps you inside this decaying metal coffin, forces you to confront your insignificance, and then makes you question whether you were ever meant to leave this ocean alive in the first place. One of the most fascinating aspects of Iron Lung is its lore. While the game doesn't explicitly explain everything, there are hints that this ocean of blood isn't just some random anomaly, it might be alive. The deeper you go, the more unnatural the environment becomes. Strange formations appear on the photographs, the submarine starts taking damage for no apparent reason, and the realization sets in that you might not be alone. The ending of Iron Lung is one of the most chilling conclusions in horror gaming. Now, I know I spoiled some before, but without spoiling too much, it delivers a moment of pure existential terror that leaves the player feeling utterly helpless. It's a reminder that sometimes the universe doesn't care about you. It doesn't matter if you struggle, it doesn't matter if you try to survive. Some forces are just beyond comprehension, beyond escape. The game received widespread praise for its oppressive atmosphere and unique approach to horror. It's often compared to Soma and The Descent, both of which explore themes of isolation, inevitability, and humans' insignificance in the face of the unknown. The influence of Lovecraftian horror is undeniable. This is a game that doesn't scare you with gore or monsters jumping out of the shadows, it terrifies you with what you can't see. The fear of the unknown, of something impossibly vast lurking just beyond your perception, is what makes Iron Lung so unforgettable. And then adding to its eerie reputation, Iron Lung became even more infamous in 2023 due to an incredibly tragic real-world event: the disappearance and implosion of the Titan submersible during its expedition to the Titanic wreck. The parallels between Iron Lung and the Titan disaster were haunting, with both involving a small, poorly constructed submarine descending into an unknown abyss, piloted with outdated or makeshift technology. And so a lot of players kind of revisited Iron Lung after the tragedy, noting how disturbingly prophetic the game felt in hindsight. Parasocial. Parasocial is one of the most unique and unsettling horror games to emerge in recent years, blending psychological horror with an exploration of modern internet culture, obsession, and the dark side of parasocial relationships. Developed by Chilla's Art, a Japanese indie studio known for their eerie, atmospheric horror games like The Closing Shift, Night Delivery, and The Convenience Store, Parasocial takes a slow burn approach to horror, immersing players in a deeply uncomfortable experience where the lines between fandom and stalking become terrifyingly blurred. The game follows a young female streamer who is successful but struggling with the constant pressures of being in the public eye. As her following grows, so does her paranoia. Strange messages, unsettling interactions, and an unshakable feeling that someone too invested in her life is getting closer. The horror of Parasocial isn't about ghosts, monsters, or supernatural threats. Instead, it's about a deeply human fear. What happens when an online fan takes their obsession too far? From the moment the game begins, it immerses players in the daily life of the streamer, showcasing the performance side of her personality versus who she is really when the cameras are off. This contrast is critical as it highlights the way that internet personalities create curated versions of themselves for an audience, while behind the scenes they're just normal people. But some fans don't see it that way. For them, influencers and streamers aren't just entertainers, they're friends, romantic interests, or even saviors. And when reality doesn't align with their expectations, things can become dangerous. And a little poi rant here, I can relate to this all too much. I don't know if you guys know who the goons are, but it's like Soup and McNasty the Do and Blarg. Whenever COVID hit, I was already a loser and they had just started their podcast, and for me personally, those guys were kind of like my only friends for a while. I listened to their podcast every week during COVID. I had nobody else to talk to. It was kind of nice to have like a friend group around that time. I was also like going from middle school to high school at that time, so I kind of, was at an age where it was more acceptable. Like, don't worry guys, I wasn't like 17 and my only friends were people online. But yeah, let me know in the comments if you have any parasocial relationships or if you're a fan of the goons as well. Hey, get me on that podcast one day, bruh. R.I.P. Soup, but, swagger is alright too. Anyways, Parasocial unfolds gradually, with the horror creeping in subtly at first. The streamer begins noticing odd comments, messages that feel too personal, fans who seem to know things they shouldn't, and small signs that she's being watched. The tension escalates when she starts receiving increasingly disturbing messages from a particular fan. What starts as admiration quickly turns into obsession, then anger, then something worse. Soon she realizes that this isn't just a case of online harassment. Her personal space has been breached. Someone is physically watching her. Someone's near. The game plays in the very real fear that many internet personalities face in the modern era. Streamers, YouTubers, and influencers often deal with obsessive fans who don't understand boundaries. In extreme cases, this has led to real-world stalking, break-ins, and even murder. Parasocial taps into this reality, making the player experience the creeping dread of being watched, pursued, and ultimately trapped by an unseen, relentless presence. What makes the game particularly effective is its realism. Kinda like Fears to Fathom a little bit, unlike other mini horror games that lean into supernatural elements, Parasocial feels disturbingly plausible. The stalker doesn't have otherworldly powers, they're just someone who refuses to let go, someone who has convinced themselves the streamer belongs to them. The idea that a harmless fan can spiral into something far more dangerous is what makes the game so unsettling. From a thematic perspective, Parasocial is a critique of internet culture and the way that online personalities are perceived by their audiences. It forces players to consider how easy it is to lose control of one's own identity in the digital age, where every action is scrutinized, every interaction is analyzed, and every personal boundary is constantly tested by an audience that demands more and more. It's a terrifying look at the consequences of extreme fandom, where admiration turns into entitlement, and eventually into something much darker. The game has been praised widely for its atmosphere, slow burn horror, and thought-provoking subject matter. Unlike other Chilla's Art games, Parasocial relies on psychological dread rather than jump scares, allowing the fear to build organically. It kind of lingers in your mind, and it makes you reconsider your own relationship with online figures and the way that social media blurs the line between the public and the private. And guys, with that, we are done with Layer 2. Who's excited? Who's hyped? This is gonna be a longer Iceberg, guys. I'm bringing it back to the old poi days where I did 2-hour long icebergs. I don't know exactly how long it's going to be at this point. I haven't finished recording it, obviously, but it's going to be about 2 hours, so I'm pretty fucking hyped. And in Layer 3, the first game we're talking about is The Park. The Park is a psychological horror game developed by Funcom and released in 2015. While it's a short walking simulator style experience, it dives deep into themes of grief, mental illness, and the horrors of childhood trauma. Set in the same universe as The Secret World, Funcom's horror-themed MMO, The Park takes players through a twisted, decaying amusement park filled with disturbing symbolism and a creeping sense of dread. It's not a traditional horror game in the sense of jump scares and combat. Instead, it's an exploration of psychological horror where reality kind of turns into a nightmare. So, the game follows Lorraine, a single mother searching for her son, Calum, who runs into Atlantic Island Park after hours. From the very start, Lorraine is troubled. She narrates her inner thoughts, revealing her exhaustion, depression, and a deep resentment bubbling beneath the surface. Her relationship with Calum is complicated, and as the game progresses, it becomes increasingly clear that her search for him isn't just about finding a missing child, it's about confronting the painful truths of her past and the darkness inside her own mind. The amusement park itself is a hauntingly perfect setting for psychological horror. What should be a place of joy and excitement is instead abandoned, broken, and filled with eerie remnants of its former life. The rides Lorraine encounters each serve as metaphors for her trauma, unraveling her past piece by piece. One of the most disturbing moments in the game happens inside a ride called the House of Horrors, where players are bombarded with fragmented memories, hallucinations, and surreal imagery that suggest Lorraine's descent into madness. The game draws heavily from classic psychological horror tropes: unreliable narration, shifting realities, and the fear that the protagonist's own mind is working against them. There are hints that Lorraine may be suffering from schizophrenia, depression, or post-traumatic stress disorder, all of which manifest through her hallucinations and disturbing inner monologue. One of the most chilling aspects of The Park is that by the end, players are left questioning what was real and what was imagined. Was Calum ever actually in danger, or was this entire journey just a manifestation of Lorraine's deteriorating mental state? The story of The Park is tied to The Secret World, where Atlantic Island Park has a sinister history. In that MMO's lore, the park was built by a man named Nathaniel Winter who had ties to dark supernatural forces. The park was plagued by mysterious deaths and disappearances, and some believed that it was cursed or haunted. While The Park doesn't lean too heavily into these supernatural elements, knowing the backstory adds another layer of unease. It suggests that the horror Lorraine experiences isn't just psychological, but something far older and darker. One of the game's most talked about moments is its ending. Without spoiling it too much, it delivers a gut-wrenching moment that forces players to reevaluate everything they've experienced. It doesn't rely on a big monster or a shocking twist, just the quiet, horrifying realization of what's actually been happening all along. The game leaves players with an overwhelming sense of tragedy, making it clear that the true horror isn't in the amusement park, but in the pain that Lorraine had been carrying all this time. While The Park received mixed reviews due to its short length, it can be completed in about an hour. It was praised for its heavy atmosphere, disturbing themes, and strong writing. It's an experience that lingers, not because of cheap scares, but because of the way that it burrows into the player's mind. The Path. The Path is not a horror game in the way you might expect. There are no jump scares, no monsters chasing you, and no obvious threats, but it is one of the most unsettling games you'll ever play. Developed by Tale of Tales in 2009, The Path is a twisted, dream-like reimagining of Little Red Riding Hood, where 6 sisters, each at different stages of adolescence, are sent on the same journey. Follow the path to grandmother's house, and whatever you do, don't stray into the woods. The game gives you a choice. You can actually obey the rules and walk straight to grandmother's house. If you do that, you arrive safely and nothing happens, and the game basically tells you you failed. But if you do step off the path, if you wander into the deep, quiet forest, that's when the real game begins. Each sister has her own wolf in the forest. These aren't literal wolves, but metaphorical ones, figures and experiences that change them forever. Some are menacing, some are alluring, and some are just sad. One might be a strange man by a playground, another a charismatic young boy in the ruins of an abandoned building. Each encounter plays out differently, but no matter what, once you meet your wolf, there's no going back. When you actually arrive at grandmother's house after meeting your wolf, the game takes a sudden nightmarish turn. The house transforms into an abstract, surreal horror sequence reflecting on the irreversible change that's just happened to you. And then your journey ends. The horror of the path isn't in what you see, it's in what you don't see. The game never explicitly tells you what happens when each girl meets her wolf, but the implications are deeply unsettling. It's a game about growing up, about losing innocence, about experiences that mark you forever. And it forces you to make those choices yourself. You could stay on the path, you could avoid all this, but curiosity, temptation, or sheer inevitability will eventually pull you into the forest. Mechanically, the path is slow, almost hypnotic. The act of wandering the woods feels lonely, quiet, and meditative. You piece together each girl's story through small interactions, subtle changes in their demeanor, and the way the world responds to them. It's more of an art piece than a traditional horror game, but that's what makes it so disturbing. It leaves everything up to interpretation, and your mind will fill in the blanks with something far more terrifying than anything the game could have actually shown. At the time of its release, the path was pretty divisive. Some people dismissed it as pretentious, saying it wasn't even a real game. Others called it one of the most important indie horror experiences ever made. Over time, it's been reevaluated and recognized as an early example of games as storytelling experiments. Something that games like Gone Home, Inside, and What Remains of Edith Finch later built on. Remember, this shit came out in 2009, bro. But even today, the path still holds a unique place in horror. It's not trying to scare you in a conventional sense, it's trying to make you feel something. Something vague, unsettling, and deeply personal. And once you've played it, you can't unthink it. Shinkin Sin Zero. You're on a late night bullet train, alone. The hum of the tracks, the dim overhead lights, the occasional announcement. It's the kind of quiet that should be peaceful, but it isn't. Something feels wrong. That's the setup for Shinkin Sin Zero, a first-person psychological horror game from Chilla's Art again, the Japanese indie studio known for its slow-burn, atmosphere-heavy horror. This time, the horror unfolds inside a Shinkansen, Japan's high-speed railway system. The game wastes no time pulling you in. You take a seat, the train is in motion, and now it's just you and the long stretch of empty seats. At first, everything seems normal, just an eerily empty train ride home. But the longer you sit there, the more you notice things that don't make quite sense. A lone passenger in another row sitting too still, a flickering light at the end of the car, the way the train seems to be moving but you can't tell how long it's been. It's that kind of horror, that kind that plays with your sense of time and space, making you question whether you're really alone or if something is creeping closer when you're not looking. Chilla's art has a signature style, slow tension, mundane environments that start to feel off, and horror that builds without cheap tricks. Shinkin Sin Zero follows that formula, but does something even more unnerving. It traps you in a moving space. There's nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, the train keeps going and whatever is on board with you isn't getting off. Now, Shinkin Sin Zero isn't just a horror game where you sit and wait for something to happen. It's an anomaly detection horror game, a subgenre that turns spotting small, eerie inconsistencies into the core mechanic. We talked about one earlier. Here's how it works. You're trapped inside the seemingly endless bullet train trying to reach level 0. The train is made up of different levels, and to progress you need to observe your surroundings carefully. The main mechanic revolves around detecting anomalies, subtle, and sometimes not so subtle, changes in the train's environment. If something is off, like a passenger behaving strangely, a door that shouldn't be open, or a light flickering when it wasn't before, you move to the next level. And if everything looks normal, though, you move backward, and your goal is to keep moving in the correct direction until you reach level 0. And then if you go the wrong way, it resets. What makes this game so effective is its pacing. It doesn't throw scares at you immediately, instead it lets you sit in that discomfort. Watching the train's interior shift ever so slightly, you start noticing things like those anomalies I was talking about. And then eventually the horror escalates, but in a way that feels kind of inevitable. Thematically, Shinkin Sin Zero taps into something deeply unsettling: the isolation of public spaces at night. If you've ever been on a train past midnight, you know the feeling. The normal rules of social interaction don't apply anymore. The few passengers left are either asleep, lost in thought, or simply there, and sometimes they feel too there. Chilla's art games are often based on urban legends, ghost stories, or real-world fears, and while Shinkin Sin Zero doesn't have a direct connection to a known folktale, it feels like something that could have happened. Stories about people boarding late-night trains and never getting off, or seeing something that they're not supposed to, is pretty common in Japanese horror. So it follows the same theme, you know. April 24th. April 24th is a first-person psychological horror game from Amika Games, a developer known for immersive, slow-burn horror experiences. This time, you're not playing as a helpless victim or someone running from the unknown. You're a journalist investigating a horrific crime that took place on April 24th. The house where it all started is under police guard, but you manage to get inside, determined to uncover the truth. What starts as a simple investigation quickly turns into something much more disturbing. Something is in the house with you. The gameplay revolves around exploration and VHS tapes. The house is abandoned, silent, but filled with clues about what happened that night. Your main objective is to watch these VHS tapes, which contain footage recorded before, during, and after the crime. Every time you play one, reality seems to shift just a little bit. Things change, the air gets heavier, and the house starts to feel wrong. You're not just watching the past is bleeding into the present, and the more you've uncovered, the more you realize that you're not alone. Unlike typical horror games with complex mechanics, April 24th is a narrative-driven experience. You aren't solving puzzles or fighting anything. You're simply walking, watching, and experiencing the horror unfold. Visually, the game leans into a VHS aesthetic, distorting your view and making everything feel hazy and unreliable. You're never quite sure if what you're seeing is real or just a trick of the tape. Sound design plays a huge role too. Footsteps echo where they shouldn't, distant noises make you question if someone's moving behind you, and the silence itself is oppressive. The goal of the game is simple: piece together what really happened on April 24th. But the deeper you go, the worse things get. By the time you reach the end, you're left with that sickening feeling that maybe some things were never meant to be uncovered. Maybe you should have left this house alone. Maybe now you can't leave. It's short, about 40 minutes, but it doesn't really waste a second. At Tony's. At first, At Tony's sounds like just another haunted pizzeria game, but it's way deeper than that. You're not dealing with some cursed animatronics running around, you're dealing with a family's dark history, ghosts that refuse to move on, and a protagonist who's way too stubborn for their own good. You play as Joe Kalo, a guy who just landed a night shift job at Tony's Pizzeria, a family restaurant that's clearly got some weird shit going on. But before you even leave for work, you get an email from your dad, Mike, basically demanding that you quit immediately. No good luck, no how's the new job, just you will comply. Obviously you ignore him, and your cousin Jimmy sends you a much more normal email, welcoming you to the job. Jimmy's a good dude. Unlike your dad, this Jimmy guy seems actually happy for you. Now before heading out, you get a moment that perfectly sets a tone for the game. You check the peephole of your apartment, and there's a creepy woman standing in the hallway just staring. Great. Once you get to Tony's Pizzeria, things seem relatively normal, aside from the fact that the place feels empty in a way that's unsettling. No customers, just delivery orders. At first, the game is kind of funny. It tricks you into thinking that it's like a fucking pizza making simulator. You take orders, put together pizzas, send them out. Pretty easy, right? Except doors start closing on their own, you start hearing things, and then, out of nowhere, something crawls out of the fucking pizza river. Oh, and then when you just think you imagined it, you find a gas stove left on by itself in the back. This restaurant is like actively trying to kill you. Then you get a phone call from the guy who had the job before you, and he's telling you basically, get out, don't come back. But if you must stay, he says he'll help you survive. At this point, a normal person would quit, but Joe, I guess, is not a normal guy. He's stubborn as hell, so instead of quitting, he goes back for another shift. After your first shift, you go home and start having dreams, but not the normal kind. You find yourself in gray hallways following music leading to a bedroom with a journal from Annabella. Who's Annabella? She was part of the Falco family, the people who ran Tony's. She was engaged but worried about the future, wondering if she'd be treated well or end up like her mother. And she kept returning to Tony's because it was a place her father loved. When you wake up, it's back to work, and surprise, your psycho dad emails you again, furious that you ignored him. Not shocking, I guess. Jimmy also emails you and sends you a video, which you watch before heading out. And then the game takes another hard turn into horror. So first of all, that creepy woman from earlier, she's not done. When you try to leave for work, she walks down the hall, breaking every light in her path. The elevator power cuts out, trapping you in darkness before suddenly working again. And then, on the way to your car, you black out and wake up on a swing. And now there's a ghost kid who wants to play with you. After playing with him for a bit, you find a memorial for him in the park. This kid is long dead. The game doesn't just throw ghosts at you, it makes you interact with them before revealing that you shouldn't have ever been able to. Anyways, then it's back to work. During your shifts, the previous employee keeps calling you, dropping more hints about what's actually going on. The ghosts aren't random, they're connected to that Falco family. Annabella is haunting the pizzeria and she wants something. The Falcos were involved in some serious shit, and your dad, Mike, is right in the middle of it. Then you get an email addressed to, quote, all the Falcos, including you. It says that Gina's remains have been respectfully and legally disposed of. Who's Gina? Your mother. Your cousin calls and gives his condolences about Gina, confirming that your own family kept you away from her. And that's when the game really shifts into full psychological horror. Eventually, the ex-employee gives you a ritual to summon Annabella, and you actually do it. It works, but she's too unstable, and she locks you inside the restaurant. She's trying to trap you there with her forever. This leads to the final big choice. Burn the place down, or leave. If you burn it down, you free Annabella's spirit and yourself. But that doesn't mean you're safe. Mike, your dad, disappears. And in the final moment of the game, you wake up in the trunk of his car. He's taken you, he's going to re-educate you. Your father, the guy who spent the whole game trying to keep you away from Tony's, is actually the real monster all along. The game starts off pretending to be a haunted pizzeria game, but it's actually about generational trauma and like family secrets and shit. Your father's not protecting you, he's controlling you just like he controlled everyone else in that family. And that's what makes that Tony's so fucking effective. It's pretty good. Fears to Fathom Carson House. Fears to Fathom Carson House is the third episode in the episodic horror series Fears to Fathom. In this installment, you play as Noah Baker, an 18-year-old from the Midwest. It's September 24th, 2009, and you've agreed to house sit for Roy Carson, a friend of your father's and the COO of a local media company. Sounds like an easy gig for the weekend, but things take a turn that you probably didn't expect. Probably because, I don't know, bro, maybe you expected all this shit. You arrive at the Carson residence and find the key hidden in the backyard, just like Roy said. The house is modern and spacious, equipped with a security system you can access through the office computer. Roy communicates with you via text messages, starting with a simple task. Feed the family dog, Zeke. After taking care of Zeke, Roy asks for your help to remove a virus from his computer. You handle it, which also restores the functionality of the home's CCTV security camera system. Settling into the office, you decide it's a good spot to catch up on homework, all while texting your girlfriend, Evelyn Cooper. As the evening rolls on, Roy requests another favor. Pick up some groceries from a nearby store called Nooks. Canucks? I don't know. He mentions that he's left a $100 bill on his bedside table to cover the costs. And also you got lucky because he says that you can buy one thing for yourself. You decide to use Alex's bicycle, Roy's son's bike, to make the trip. At Nooks, you bump into your school friends Andy and Turner. They casually mention that your ex-girlfriend Kara was at the store just before you arrived. It's a brief encounter, but it leaves you uneasy, stirring up past memories you'd rather forget. I mean, probably, I don't know. A lot of people, you know, are weird and they think about their ex-girlfriends while they have another girlfriend. If that's you, bro, move on or don't date anybody else. Anyway, Back at the Carson house, your friends urge you to look up Roy Carson's divorce online. Curiosity gets the better of you when you discover that Roy's been in the spotlight recently due to a pretty messy divorce. He's been receiving death threats and unwanted attention from fans of his ex-wife. This revelation adds a layer of tension to your stay, making you a lot more cautious as you go about your tasks. While you're trying to focus on your homework, the doorbell rings. Given what you just read about Roy's situation, you're hesitant to answer. After confirming with Roy that he had ordered a pizza for dinner, you cautiously open the door to the delivery person. Relieved but still on edge, you take the pizza and settle in to watch some TV, hoping to relax. But the peace doesn't last long. The doorbell rings again, and this time no one's there. It's just a bouquet of flowers left on the doorstep. Puzzled by the anonymous gesture, you bring the flowers inside, trying not to let it bother you. The night takes a darker turn when you receive a text message from an unknown number asking, "How are you? What did you have for dinner?" This invasive question heightens your anxiety. At 1:36 a.m., the power suddenly goes out. You hear Zeke barking and decide to investigate. Grabbing a flashlight, you make your way to the backyard, finding the circuit breaker and restoring the electricity, but that unsettling feeling doesn't go away. You start receiving more messages from the unknown number, each one more disturbing than the last. Determined to get to the bottom of this, you check the security cameras and spot a figure lurking around the house. Panic sets in as you realize someone has entered the home. You hear noises downstairs and discover the oven has been turned on. Frustrated and scared, you contact Andy, accusing him and Turner of playing pranks on you. But they deny any involvement, insisting they're both at Andy's house. Oh, fuck, by the way, did I mention that Andy and fucking Turner are like the friends that you saw at the Nux store? Anyway, yeah, they deny any involvement and insisting they're both at Andy's house. Your mind races, trying to make sense of this situation. Returning to security cameras, your worst fear is confirmed. A woman holding a kitchen knife is standing at the end of the hallway, slowly making her way toward the office. Heart pounding, you recognize her. It's Kara, your ex-girlfriend. I fucking told you, bro, don't be doing this shit. Don't be dating somebody while you're still, thinking about your ex. She stops outside the office door, her voice eerily calm as she talks about wanting to reconcile, but her words quickly turn threatening. She mentions Evelyn, making it clear that she's been watching you closely. Desperate to escape, you quietly move to the laundry room across the hall, hiding and hoping that she doesn't find you. Peering through the blinds, you see her searching the office, giving you a chance to slip out and make a run for it. You flee the house, not looking back, as the adrenaline propels you forward. In the aftermath, it's revealed that Kara fled before the police arrived. The investigation uncovers that she had been struggling with substance abuse, which led to erratic and dangerous behavior. Your brief relationship with her had ended due to these issues, but she hadn't taken it well. The incident leaves you shaken. One of the most unsettling things about this game is how normal it all feels at first. The game drops you into this realistic world. You're just a kid, house sitting for the weekend, doing everyday things like feeding a dog, getting groceries, checking your emails, and doing homework. And I'm sure most of us can, imagine this. We've probably all done something like this. But the way it slowly shifts from mundane to nightmarish is what makes it so effective. It doesn't start with a bang, it lets you get comfortable first, which makes it even worse when things start going wrong. And let's talk about the sound design too, because that's a huge part of why this game gets under your skin. The game is filled with subtle audio cues that make you question everything. You'll hear distant footsteps, faint whispers, objects shifting slightly, but then when you check and nothing's there. The way the game messes with your perception of sound and silence is genius. Silence is never comforting here. It's oppressive. It makes you hyper aware of every small creak, every shift in the environment. It trains you to listen for danger, so when something finally does happen, it feels like it's been creeping up on you the whole time. Then there's the lighting. The house has this soft, dim glow in most rooms, with shadows stretching a little too far. The way the darkness clings to the edges of your vision makes you paranoid. Even when you're just walking through the house, it feels like something could be there, just outside your field of view. And then there's that moment, the security camera reveal. It's just fucking really good, and that's what makes this game hit so hard. It's not just a scary story, it's real, or it feels uncomfortably real. And then when you barely escape, there's no catharsis really. The police arrive, but Kara's already gone. It doesn't end with a big dramatic confrontation, it ends with that lingering dread that she could still be out there. Massacre at the Mirage. Massacre at the Mirage is a first-person horror game set on Halloween night in 1988, throwing you into the eerie, dimly lit halls of the Mirage Cinema, a beloved but aging movie theater in the town of Crimson Ridge. At first, it feels like any other Halloween. People are out for a night of scary movies, cheap popcorn, and nostalgia. But as the night unfolds, it becomes clear that something is very, very wrong. A masked clown is lurking in the shadows. The game starts with you playing as Luna, a young woman just trying to get through the night at her job at a car dealership. She's distracted, playing an old horror game called Terror at Oakheart when she gets a call from her boyfriend, Billy. Billy is the town's local radio DJ, and his show is just about to start. Their conversation is flirty, but, kind of awkward. The voice acting here isn't exactly Oscar-worthy. But, it sets the scene. Billy is in the studio getting ready for his Halloween special, while Luna is just trying to finish up work and get home. But before she can leave, things start getting weird. First, there's this sketchy ice cream truck that drives past. Luna makes a note of how odd it is, but brushes it off and keeps working. Then she gets a weird phone call on the office payphone. No words, just eerie music playing on the other end. Suddenly, one of the car alarms outside starts blaring. When she goes to turn it off, she notices the ice cream truck is now parked outside, but the driver is nowhere to be seen. The tension builds as she cautiously investigates a noise coming from the trash bin, and then BAM! The clown strikes. Luna never makes it home. Then the game switches to Nia, a worker at the Mirage, who's stuck working the Halloween shift for the second year in a row. She's outside on a smoke break, complaining about how she should be out partying instead. Her only comfort is that her favorite horror movie, Nosu, is playing that night, and her friend Ben is working the ticket booth, which means at least she won't be completely bored. But of course, her night is not going to be as uneventful as she thought. Nia heads out to a nearby gas station to grab more cigarettes, where she chats with Oscar, the cashier. He's got that, I don't get paid enough for this kind of vibe, and lets her buy whatever she needs before she heads back to the theater. As soon as she gets back, Ben tells her that their manager, Phil, wants to see her. Phil is exactly the kind of creepy boss you'd expect in a game like this. His voice acting is unsettling, and he gives Nia a list of last-minute tasks before they open. Return some records to the radio station across the street, take out the trash, and grab some test footage from the basement. As she runs these errands, things start to feel off. She gets startled by a creepy homeless man waiting for change, and then in the basement she meets Eric, the maintenance guy. But he's kind of way too chill given the atmosphere of the night. But nothing seems outright dangerous yet. It's just that creeping sense of unease that something is about to go very wrong. Once the theater opens, the gameplay shifts between Nia and Ben as they take tickets and serve snacks to moviegoers. That's when he shows up, the clown. He doesn't attack right away, he just lingers. He walks up to Ben's ticket booth, staring at him through the glass. When Ben tells him to leave, the clown punches the glass so hard it nearly shatters. Ben freaks out and tells Nia what happened, deciding to go tell Phil so that he can call the cops. But before he can do that, he gets lost inside the supply closet. The clown is already inside the theater. At the same time, Oscar's back at the gas station when he hears something crash in the garage. When he goes to investigate, the power cuts out. The eerie music starts up again, and then he finds something bad. We don't get much time to process it though, because the clown is already behind him. The clown isn't just picking off random victims either, he's toying with them. After Oscar, he moves on to the homeless guy Nia ran into earlier. The guy just wants some booze, but instead the clown hands him a, quote, present. Whatever is inside kills him instantly. Back at the theater, Ben is still trapped in the supply closet while Nia is trying to figure out what the hell is going on. Then the clown grabs her and throws her down the basement stairs. Meanwhile, we switch perspectives to Billy, the radio DJ, who's doing his Halloween broadcast when the clown suddenly appears outside the studio. The lights explode, the power flickers, and Billy gets absolutely annihilated in one of the most brutal kills in the game. With Billy dead, we're back to Nia, who wakes up in the basement nailed to a chair. Over the intercom, we hear Billy's voice, except it's not really Billy anymore. It's the clown mocking her. Quote, "The audience is waiting and you're the star attraction," unquote. Nia rips herself free, pushing through the pain and making her way upstairs. The theater is a bloodbath, bodies everywhere. There's words scrawled on the walls in blood, and the clown statue stands in the middle of the room watching. At this point, Nia knows that she's not getting out without a fight. She remembers that Phil keeps a shotgun in his office, but when she gets there, she finds Phil himself bloody and barely conscious. He gives her part of the code to the safe, but she has to guess the last number. Once she cracks it, she finally gets the gun, and now it's final girl time. She heads to the main hall where the clown is waiting for her. They fight, but this isn't some easy boss battle. The clown is fast. He dodges, he taunts, he laughs as he tries to finish what he started. But Nia isn't playing this game anymore. She blows him away. And like that, it's over. Or is it? As the credits roll, we get one final shot. The clown's body is gone. Massacre at the Mirage is like a love letter to 80s horror. It's pretty well done. And with that, guys, we are done with Layer 3 into the final Layer 4. Lost in Vivo. Lost in Vivo is a first-person horror game that delves deep into the psyche, exploring themes of claustrophobia, personal trauma, and self-acceptance. Developed by Kira, oh no, I don't know, bro. Light's smart as fuck. He can probably make a pretty good game. The game presents a harrowing journey through dark, confined spaces. The story begins with the protagonist, whose gender is unspecified, undergoing in vivo exposure therapy, a form of CBT, not that kind of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, designed to help individuals face their fears. To assist in this process, they're accompanied by their service dog named Danny. While walking home from a therapy session, a sudden rainstorm triggers a flood and Danny is swept into a storm drain. Determined to rescue their companion, the protagonist ventures into the sewer system, confronting their claustrophobia head-on. As they navigate the labyrinth sewers, they encounter unsettling environments and creatures that symbolize deeper psychological struggles. Early on, they come across the dwelling of a homeless man who, driven mad by isolation, has gouged out his own eyes to escape the gaze of a perceived sinister entity. This encounter foreshadows the pervasive theme of unseen horrors lurking in the darkness. Deeper into the sewers, the protagonist finds themselves in an abandoned subway system. Here, they discover diary entries that shed light on their past. These notes reveal a troubled history involving a toxic relationship, body image issues, and the loss of a child. The protagonist's ex-partner pressured them to lose weight, leading to feelings, of inadequacy and self-loathing. This internalized negativity manifests in the game's environments and enemies, such as aggressive mirror-like entities and pervasive weight loss advertisements. The subway section also introduces the ghost of a girl who committed the, self-ending thing by stepping in front of a train. This apparition serves as both a literal and symbolic obstacle, representing the protagonist's own struggles with depression and suicidal thoughts. It's kind of sad. It's actually all sad. This all game is very sad. By restoring power to the subway lines, the protagonist helps the ghost find peace, mirroring kind of their own journey towards self-acceptance. Emerging from the subway, the protagonist descends into cavernous tunnels where they confront a monstrous insectoid creature masquerading as their lost dog, Danny. This creature symbolizes the protagonist's paranoia and fear of deception. By collecting beetle-shaped emblems, they unlock the path forward, signifying their efforts to piece together their fractured psyche. The journey continues into a research laboratory belonging to Nasumi testing, where unethical experiments have taken place. Here, the protagonist learns about a doctor, a scientist who created a monstrous entity through dark rituals. And that being is a being that can only move when not observed. And that kind of embodies the protagonist's fear of the unknown and the unseen threats lurking in their mind. The laboratory's grotesque experiments and the presence of humanoid rat creatures further emphasize themes of dehumanization and loss of identity. After escaping the lab, the protagonist returns to the sewers where they confront manifestations of their own brain, which berate them with negative thoughts and self-doubt. This internal battle culminates in a confrontation with the Siren, a monstrous embodiment of their deepest fears. By defeating the Siren, the protagonist symbolically overcomes the traumas and negative thought patterns that have plagued them. The game offers multiple endings, with each reflecting the protagonist's choices and psychological state. In the good ending, they emerge from the sewers, reunite with Danny, and feel a sense of liberation from their past fears and traumas. Other endings depict less favorable outcomes, such as rejecting the journey, abandoning Danny, or succumbing to darker forces. The Cabin Factory. The Cabin Factory is a short horror anomaly hunting experience developed by International Cat Studios, that's cute, and released on December 13th, 2024. Inspired by liminal spaces and psychological horror walking simulators like PT. In the Cabin Factory, players assume the role of a newly hired cabin inspector, and your primary responsibility is to inspect cabins and determine whether they are haunted by identifying any anomalies. The core gameplay loop involves thoroughly examining each cabin for unusual occurrences, just like that one train game from earlier. If you detect any anomalies, you're advised to exit immediately and press the danger button. If the cabin appears free of them though, you can safely press the clear button. The game emphasizes careful observation and attention to detail, as some anomalies can be subtle and easily missed. You gotta remain vigilant because failing to identify a haunted cabin can lead to unexpected and pretty frightening consequences. The Cabin Factory is more than just a horror inspection job though. It's a slow, creeping descent into trauma and shit like that. The company, the Cabin Factory, specializes in building these cabins for theme parks and movies, but after a lawsuit claims that some of the cabins are actually haunted. The company, the Cabin Factory, specializes in building these cabins for theme parks and movies, but after a lawsuit claims that some of them are actually haunted, they begin hiring inspectors to verify their safety. Everything about this job does feel off from the start, like with the liminal space thing I said earlier, Greta has no human contact. Just automated instructions played over a telecom system. She's forced to accept terms and conditions that can change at any time without notice, locking her into a pretty shady contract. She's left completely alone, her first task being to enter the inspection room where the cabins are brought in on a conveyor belt. The rules are simple. Inspect the cabin, if anything moves, hit the danger button like I already said, if it seems normal, hit clear. At first, the job seems unsettling, but not outright terrifying. The first cabin that arrives is modeled after Hansel and Gretel, featuring hyper-realistic wax figures posed inside. A father figure sits motionless at the table, a mother painted into an eerie portrait, and a small boy, Hansel, sits upstairs with a cloth draped over his face. The cabin is eerily quiet, its dim lighting and antique furniture creating a heavy, suffocating atmosphere. But nothing moves, so you mark it as safe. And then the next cabin arrives, and this time something's wrong. The mother's portrait moves, her eyes following Greta wherever she goes. Hansel's legs start twitching, subtly shifting as if he's about to stand up. But the father, the most imposing figure in the room, never moves. She rushes out and hits the danger button, officially marking it as haunted. And then the third cabin arrives and everything changes. A news report plays over the speakers. A real cabin in the woods burned down, killing a family of 4. 2 bodies, the parents, were found, but their children, a 10-year-old girl and her 6-year-old brother, were never found. The fire is believed to be intentional, with no clear explanation for how the parents became trapped inside. And that's when the pieces start falling into place. The wax figures in the horror cabins, they aren't props, they're representations of this very real family. The father, mother, and children who lived in that cabin before it burned down. The anomalies aren't just some random supernatural activity, they're the souls of this family, still lingering, still haunting these artificial recreations of their home. The deeper Greta goes, the more she remembers. In another cabin, she sees a little girl hiding, whispering desperately to her younger brother, "We have to get away from him." A flashback-style vision plays out, memories of an abusive home. The father and mother weren't just victims of the fire, they were monsters. The mother was cruel, manipulative, and violent, especially toward Hansel, who she would punish relentlessly. In the basement, Greta finds a scene of horror, a vision of Hansel being beaten by his mother, her face now monstrous, towering over him as he cries. Then, standing in front of the mirror in the basement bathroom, Greta sees herself, but not as an old woman. She sees herself as the 10-year-old girl from the fire. And that's when everything clicks. This isn't just an inspection job, this isn't just a haunted cabin. Greta isn't just an employee, she's the little girl who escaped the fire all those years ago. The visions aren't ghosts, they're her own memories playing out in an endless tormenting loop. The parents trapped inside, the fire raging, Hansel holding on to his frog plushie. All of it is her past, forcing her to relive it. And then the mother speaks. The bathroom door slams shut, and Greta hears her mother's voice gaslighting her, trying to break her down. You want to leave, Greta? That's fine, but your brother, he's staying here. You'll abandon him just like you abandoned us. What do you think you'll find outside? Nothing. You are nothing. The mother's figure is no longer just a wax model, it's alive. It chases Greta, forcing her to flee, to escape the cabin, to slam the danger button over and over, but no matter how many times she resets, the truth doesn't change. She sees the fire, she sees her parents screaming inside as the flames consume them. She sees herself and Hansel standing outside, holding hands, watching their parents die. And finally she goes home. The job is done, she's survived, she returns to her small, empty apartment, alone. And then, the closet door opens. Inside the closet isn't clothes, it's the cabin. The very same cabin she tried to escape all those years ago. Because no matter how far she runs, she can never leave. The trauma never really left her. Psychopomp GOLD. Psychopomp GOLD is a game that takes you deep into a surreal, conspiratorial nightmare, where reality is stretched and broken and you begin to question everything. At its core, it's a first-person dungeon crawler, but unlike the typical high fantasy settings you'd expect, this game throws you into a decayed artificial world shaped by unknowable forces. You play as a nameless protagonist who has built a helmet, the Psychopomp, which was meant to grant the power to read minds, but instead of peering into the thoughts of others, it exposes a hidden world layered beneath our reality. One filled with horrifying cryptic truths that should have never been seen. The gameplay is deceptively simple. You move through grid-based environments using 4 basic actions. Look, which is where you just observe the world. Speak, which is when you attempt to communicate. Touch, and hammer. Each level revolves around infiltrating massive buildings, seemingly normal structures on the surface, but once inside you find there's something far worse. These places are alive, stitched together from nightmares and conspiracies, hiding experiments, forgotten horrors, and layers of deception. Your goal in each is to destroy the heart of the building, some core monstrous entity keeping it alive, before moving on to the next. The combat is simple, mostly just swinging your hammer while backing away, but the deeper you go, the less the game is about fighting and more about understanding what has happened to the world. Every level offers cryptic clues about what's going on. Government experiments, ancient beings, a world that's been altered beyond recognition, and you have to piece it together yourself. There are no direct answers, just the lingering feeling that everything is wrong. At first, it might seem like the world you're uncovering is just a hallucination, the side effect of the helmet or a descent into madness. But the deeper you go, the more you realize this is all real. This isn't just your mind breaking, it's humanity itself that's been broken. Something invaded, something took over, and what remains of people are nothing more than failed experiments. Attempts to recreate what was lost. The buildings you infiltrate are connected to government sites, places where grotesque biological tests were conducted to manufacture new forms of human life. But none of them ever turned out right. Instead, they became husks, barely holding on to anything resembling consciousness, and you were walking among their remnants. The world isn't the same as the one we know. It's smaller, altered, as if Earth itself has been rewritten. Humanity as we know it is gone, wiped out by 4 godlike beings that came from beyond the stars. They treated Earth as a toy, warping and reshaping it for their own amusement. At some point, humans stop being humans, and what remains are attempts at humanity. Soulless constructs built from clay failing to hold form. The real people, the ones who lived before everything changed, are extinct. They're long gone, but you're different. There's a museum in the game that hints at all of this. It's a government facility detailing how these beings tried to reconstruct people, how they thought all humans had been destroyed, but perhaps a few still remained. And if that's true, then what are you? The game presents two endings. Firstly is the home ending. If you collect special keys hidden in each level, you unlock the path to a strange personal, quote, home. Here you meet two figures, the Queen of Venus and the King of Mercury. They seem to exist in some strange divine realm, and they recognize you as something more than human. They talk about hammers and nails. One destroys, the other builds. Alone, they're meaningless, but together they could create something new. Then the game simply ends, leaving you to wonder if they were even real. And the second ending is the new goddess ending. This is the more common ending and arguably the true one. After reaching the end of your journey, you shed your skin and ascend, taking your place as the new Queen of Banners, a figure who has been worshipped throughout the game. This suggests that the gods who invaded Earth are not untouchable. Perhaps they were once humans who ascended as well. As you awaken to your divine form, you're given a brief moment to play as the King of Mercury, seeing the aftermath of what you unleashed. The Classrooms. The Classrooms is a psychological horror game that takes the familiar setting of an abandoned school and twists it into a shifting nightmare of limited space and ever-changing danger. It blends elements of found footage horror with procedural level design, meaning that every time you die, the school's layout, item locations, and threats shift into something new. It's a game that keeps you on edge and never letting you really rely on familiarity or muscle memory. At its core, it's an escape room style experience, but with heavy SCP Foundation influences where entities roam the halls and reality feels unreliable. The game is played in the first-person perspective through the lens of a handheld camera. This isn't just for style, it's crucial to survival. The camera's battery needs to be constantly replaced, adding an extra layer of tension. The game also features microphone recognition, again, meaning that speaking out loud can attract the attention of the entities. Other mechanics also add to the realism, like time skips when performing lengthy actions such as crawling through vents or operating devices. The game even incorporates AI-generated elements, from unsettlingly perfect yet artificial photos of characters to in-game corporations that feel almost too real, but with slight distortions that make them uncanny. The deeper you go, the more you realize the game isn't just about escaping a haunted school. There's some more wacky shit going on. So the story follows Robert Chen, an 18-year-old who enters a school to search for his missing younger sister, Grace Chen. On June 30th, 1996, in Manitoba, Canada, students from a local middle school mysteriously vanished. With only a camera in hand, Robert ventures into the abandoned school to investigate. But the moment he restores power by flipping the circuit breaker in the basement, the entire school shifts. The geography has changed, the exit is bricked over, and something else is in there with him. Strange, hostile entities roam the halls, and the deeper he explores, the more he uncovers about a secret organization known as ARC, or ARC, Anomalous Retrieval and Containment. ARC isn't just researching the school, they're trapping people inside it. Robert finds documents and logs left behind by other victims, like a guy named Jacob, who was a man who was forcibly brought in with only a compass and a flashlight. His notes reveal something disturbing. He never feels hungry inside the school. ARC provided him with survival codes, but some sections have been deliberately erased, leaving him to fend for himself. Another victim, Rosemary, also left notes, growing increasingly unhinged as she discovered the entities weren't just mindless monsters. They had rules and, a purpose. The entities themselves are a horrifying mix of SCP-like creatures and backroom-style anomalies. Some hunt you around based on sound, others can move only when unseen, and a few are so bizarre that they defy normal logic. The cloaked figure is one of the first ones that Robert encounters, and it's like a floating Reaper-like being that reacts to light. It's usually invisible, but if you get too close, it materializes, turning the entire room red before attacking. The cursed doll is another nightmare. It follows you, but only when you're not looking, similar to SCP-173. Its variant, the Hell doll, is even worse, faster, more aggressive, and capable of teleportation. The game constantly throws new threats at you, like Clown Screecho, a grotesque humanoid with a head shaped like a massive ear, hunting purely by sound. If it hears your microphone, it'll find you. And then there's the Gangler, an emaciated, twisted creature with a completely backwards head that crawls on all fours. As Robert progresses, he learns that ARC is responsible for more than just this school. He finds connections to the Asbest Corporation, a massive electronics company with deep ties to ARC. Alexander Asbest, the company's CEO, seems to have been involved in experiments far beyond simple corporate greed. ARC isn't just studying anomalies, they are creating them. His father, Daniel Asbest, founded the company in 1925, and over the decades, it grew into something far more powerful than a simple tech business. The school was just one of many places where their work went terribly, horribly wrong. Each chapter of the game changes the setting, enemies, and objectives, creating new layers of horror. The classroom is the first area, a standard American school turned into an unpredictable nightmare. You have to find a key to unlock the elevator while avoiding shifting entities. The library introduces Clown Screecho, where silence is survival. The restroom forces Robert to wade through flooded hallways while avoiding the stalking gangler. The dark room removes your ability to see clearly, filling the school with pitch black corridors where the light switch is both a tool and a trap. The swimming pool stage is particularly eerie. It feels almost dreamlike with an oddly calming soundtrack. Then there's the playroom, arguably one of the most terrifying areas. It's a maze of jungle gyms, slides, and tunnels, a twisted recreation of childhood nostalgia. The area is filled with bizarre, smell-based enemies, meaning you can't just hide, you have to actively mask your scent. The playroom also requires manipulating power to escape, forcing you to juggle multiple objectives while being constantly hunted. And just when you think you understand the game, it throws a third enemy into the mix, one from a previous chapter, meaning you have no safe zones left. The deeper you go, the more the world seems to unravel. The game never gives you clear answers, only fragmented documents and cryptic clues. ARC's presence grows stronger, and the entities become less like monsters and more like something deliberate. The architecture of the school starts breaking apart, revealing industrial areas, research labs, and portals to places that shouldn't exist. What started as an abandoned school in Manitoba becomes something much bigger, something inescapable. As Robert fights to escape, he starts finding glimpses of Grace, his missing sister. But the more he sees her, the more it becomes clear she isn't the same anymore. Her voice is distorted, her movements unnatural. Is she still human? Is she even real? The game never tells you for sure. By the time that you reach the final areas, the school is gone. What's left is something far beyond human comprehension. Entities roam freely, ARC's influence is undeniable, and Robert's faced with a final horrifying choice. Escape or keep going deeper. This game's sick as fuck. I love liminal spaces, guys. I mean, if you've been around here for a while on my channel, you know that liminal spaces is like my shit. Welcome to the game 2. Welcome to the game 2 is one hell of a ride. From the second you start, it throws you into a high-stakes nightmare where you're trying to save a woman's life while dodging an assassin, evading the police, and scouring the deep web for hidden keys. It's overwhelming, and that's the point. You're given time, but it never feels like enough. Every moment is stressful, and every second wasted brings Amelia, the woman you're trying to save, closer to death. You play as Clint Edwards, a reporter investigating Amelia's disappearance. She appears on a live stream, frantic and terrified, complaining that a group of masked figures called the Noir is hunting her. The Noir are unsettling, disappearing when you look away and becoming aggressive when you get too close. Your job is to track her location before they kill her, but the only way to do that is by finding 8 hidden hashes scattered across the deep web. If that sounds complicated, it is, but at its core, the game is simple. You just have to find those keys before Amelia dies. The disturbing part isn't the game itself, but the websites you have to search through. You'll find everything from bizarre fetish sites to markets for human trafficking and worse. One moment you're scrolling through a site selling semen, and the next you're on a page where a father is renting out his own daughter. It's fucked up. The game forces you to face the absolute worst parts of humanity, making you wonder if it could actually exist in real life and how much of it does. But that's the real horror, isn't it? The idea that some of this might be real. Sure, it's a game, but it's based on concepts that have real-world counterparts. The dark web isn't just fiction. Some people really do commit atrocities behind the safety of that screen, and anonymity makes it easier for them. That's one of the biggest themes in this game, anonymity versus accountability. One of the most unsettling parts of the game is that Amelia's livestream isn't private. Thousands of people are watching, voting on whether she should live or die, and the majority vote is for her death. That's what makes it so terrifying. It's not the mass killers or assassins stalking you, it's the people. The idea that given anonymity and the ability to get away with it, so many would choose evil over good. This ties into Carl Jung's idea of the shadow, the darker side of humanity. Jung believed that everyone has a side they repress, the part that wants to lie, cheat, steal, or worse. And the only way to be truly whole is to acknowledge it and to accept that you're not purely good. The game forces you to face that duality not just in the world around you, but in Clint himself. He's trying to do something good, but he's doing it illegally. He hacks, steals, breaks laws, and even risks getting an innocent woman kidnapped if you play the game wrong. He is the hero, but his methods are questionable. And that's the end, guys. That was the psychological horror games Iceberg. I hope you enjoyed this one. I don't think it ended up being as long as I thought it was earlier. Maybe like an hour and a half around there, but still pretty long, and I just hope you guys enjoy it. This one is so fun to make. So let me know in the comments what you think. Let me know what kind of videos you want to see next, all of that awesome shit. And yeah, have a great night, everyone. Sweet dreams.